Now I want to turn to a study that is both groundbreaking and controversial. It was written by some researchers at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it uses computer models to come up with potential future scenarios. So, if, for example, human beings continue to consume resources like oil, food, fresh water at the same rate or an increased rate, it outlines how that would impact the population in terms of global wealth, famine, and disease. And it basically predicts that the breaking point will come in 2030. That's not that far away. So I want to talk about this with radio host Alex Jones. Him and his team at InfoWars have taken notice of this study. They've written a lot about it. And Alex, of course, this is very similar to a study that was released back in the 70s. Talk to me. What does this all mean?
Well, you just stole my thunder. Thank you for having me. The Club of Rome team at MIT in 1970 published the limits to growth that was given huge fanfare by Life magazine, CBS News, that by the year 2000, our entire industrial society would collapse and we'd see in the next decade an 80% population reduction. If you look at the graph, they have three different future scenarios that run from 65% population reduction to over 90%. So it runs from bad to worse. And it's the very same group of eugenicists promoting the fact that the big government has to come in and clamp down on resources and basically return us to a feudal state, or the earth will basically collapse and then we'll die. But really, if you study what the Club of Rome, UN and others have promoted, Maurice Strong, Ted Turner, is artificially cutting off our resources through artificial scarcity and what they've been billing and pushing as austerity to make us poor as a political tool of control. So what they're not telling you is they tried to break the capitalist free market system that's produced more wealth than any other system in history. No one denies that. Now they've had a crony capitalist model, Goldman Sachs and others, that finance the Club of Rome. They want to sell us on being their feudal slaves, kind of like the Hunger Games for real. And so they're getting us ready for the collapse of the economy and claiming it's our fault when really they're engineering it.
So you're saying the Club of Rome is connected to some of these larger corporations and that they actually have, it's to their benefit that people continue to cut back and think that the end of the world is coming a lot sooner than it is?
Yeah, that's it. Goldman Sachs and others, the big six banks, have created 1.5 quadrillion. They've gotten our governments to sign on to their over 1,000 trillion in fake garbage, fake paper. And now everywhere they're saying, Greece, you've got to raise your taxes, cut your benefits to pay your debts. And 92% of the Greek debt, it turns out, is other people's debt, not the Greek people. Same thing in Ireland, same thing in Iceland, but they said no. Same thing in our country. It's just the oligarchs. Club of Rome actually writes that they want to bring in a political system of feudalism, so we're so poor under neo-feudalism that we can't even finance our own lives, so that we're basically slaves to these elites. So they want a post-industrial world. Maurice Strong, who started all this with the Rockefeller Foundation, has said on record they want to destroy our society, make us poor. I mean, if I go to Whole Foods in downtown Austin, they've got magazines everywhere saying it's trendy to be poor. It's wonderful. They say that depression is good for our carbon footprint, to make it smaller. It's wonderful that all this is happening. I mean, in these Club of Rome documents, they say that they need to have shock treatment to destroy the economies of third world nations and old world nations to make them adopt population control measures.
But Alex, it's not really shocking to me. I don't really know much about the Club of Rome. It's not shocking that certain think tanks have things that benefit them and their funders and founders more than others. But the fact is, when you talk about, you know, the usage of resources, of fresh water, of oil, these are things that it's just a simple math equation. The more the population grows and the more these things are used, I mean, are you sort of downplaying the fact that this is, in fact, a problem?
Elites, since the time of Plato, 2,300 years ago, have said the world's overpopulated. The Greek philosophers said they needed to start killing the poor people because they were overpopulated, and crushing the breast of Mother Earth was the quote by Plato. And we heard the same thing 250 years ago by Malthus. Hitler said the same thing. They're telling us fresh water is not renewable. That's not true. Fresh water is renewable. In some areas, people build in the desert. Do they run out? Like Phoenix? Sure. They say trees aren't renewable. They are renewable. Oil, it's now showing, is, in most cases, not coming from dinosaur, oil or blood, but is actually being produced inside the crust and the mantle of the earth. We've got enough coal to run the United States for several thousand years. They have clean burning systems. And the elites themselves, it's a good point you make, though, they are suppressing the development of clean and free energy systems to keep us on their fossil fuel system. Then they want to create artificial scarcity and planned obsolescence to enslave us. So this is the monopoly men waging war against the free market and creating artificial scarcity through the UN Agenda 21 system.
But regarding this older study, I mean, we have this one that recently came out, but regarding this older study that sort of predicted over the last 40 years what was going to happen, some of the things that they've predicted 40 years ago are actually happening in terms of where we are in population and levels of food and hunger and things like that. What do you have to say to that? I mean, the fact that they were sort of right on.
Sure. Well, actually, I have to disagree with you. The Club of Rome, 95% of it or more is pure bull. They said we'd have an ice age by the year 2000, and then when that didn't work by the 90s, they said it was global warming. Now it's just climate change, period, they say, is unnatural. Taxpayers pay hundreds of billions a year to pay U.S. farmers not to grow. There are programs in Africa paying people not to grow. The State Department Memorandum 200 stated in the 70s that they would stir up wars and fund rebels to destabilize Africa and Latin America so they would starve and couldn't produce. Usually when you see Africans starving, they've been driven out of their lands by globalist-funded groups, like in the case of Uganda, out of their country, or Somalia for that matter, or even Tanzania. They've been driven out and then driven into the desert to die. In the State Department Memorandum 200, Kissinger says there's too much resources. We need to cut them off and use war, famine, and other programs. The carbon taxes that they wanted on the third world that they tried to pass 2 years ago in Copenhagen would have conservatively caused over 1 billion deaths in the next 10 years. So they want to cut the resources off artificially to cause starvation. Population's at 7.5 billion. It's set in most actuaries in the next 10 years to plane off by 2023, 2024 or so at 10 billion and then start going down. The U.S. is dying. Russia is dying. Japan is dying. We have 1.3 replacement rates. Italy is dying. Yes, 1.2. That means for every 2 parents, they have 1.3 children on average. There'll be nobody to pay Social Security. We are collapsing. The West is dead.